Good morning and welcome again to Joy Comes in the Morning. We're talking about giving up control and trusting God, and it's a process, I think, probably throughout our whole lives of maybe recognizing areas that we've controlled and then giving that up. So just talking a little bit more about the control issues and how it might manifest in your life. I think sometimes we try to control things in our life because we think we know the best outcome. And so if we see something happening in a way that we're not sure that's the best outcome, then we might try to control the situation. This isn't one of my Bible examples, but it is probably we could find like dozens of examples out of the Bible of control issues. In fact, I was just reading this. It was just happened to be in my Bible reading, my daily Bible reading, and that is the story of Jacob and Esau. And before they were born, Rebecca, their mother, she recognized that she was carrying twins because she could feel them moving on the inside of her, and what she would have called like the wrestle of the two of them. And God had spoken to her and said that the younger one would rule over the eldest one. And so who was the younger one? Jacob was born second, so he was the younger one, and Esau was the eldest one. And then you see the whole story of things that happened. Jacob's name actually meant supplanter, which means that he would do what he could to take or to supplant someone else, remove them from their position. I don't know about Bible names. I think there's probably a really great name of what Jacob actually means, that we would give definition to it, because why would you name your kid that if you thought it meant supplanter? But that's actually what it meant at the time. I just feel like it's probably been redeemed and given a name, a meaning that's very good. So anyway, so to mention the control issue is that God had spoken this to Rebecca. So this is a word from the Lord that he spoke directly to her heart. And then the dynamics of the family is kind of messed up. It's like if you wanted to talk about a family that had some pretty messed up dynamic, then you could study this family as well as many others, I'm sure. But in this family, it said that Isaac loved Esau because he was a man of the field. So it sounds like he was kind of a very manly man. He liked to hunt. He liked all that stuff. Jacob liked to cook. There's nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing at all. But he was the favorite of his mother. And so here's the mom. She's, Rebecca, she had carried this in her heart. And so when it came time for the father, when Isaac was getting older, and he said he wanted Esau to go out and hunt and bring in, his hunt, and then to prepare it for him. And when he prepared this meal for him of this meat that he got in his hunt, that he was going to eat it, and then he was going to give the blessing to Esau. Now the blessing from the patriarch of the family went to the firstborn, and it was a powerful thing. So even the meaning of blessing means empowered to prosper. And this was very treasured, it was very valuable, and it belonged to the firstborn. Even though Esau, through an act of his hunger, had given up his firstborn status to Jacob just to get a bowl of pottage. So some people could say he gave up his birthright for a bowl of beans. But anyway, so getting back to the control issue, a word from the Lord, and Rebecca decided to help because God had given her this word about the second son ruling over the firstborn son. And so she contrived this whole scheme and strategy to get Jacob to deceive his father and steal the blessing that belonged to Esau. And so you all know that story, but this is an example of a control issue because she was trying to help God out, I guess, to make sure that her son, who he had spoken to her about, would receive the blessing of the firstborn son, even though he was not the firstborn son. So that's a control issue, and people are oftentimes enter into manipulating circumstances for the outcome that they want to see. And maybe it's rooted because we are going to talk about another woman in the Bible that had control issues because she's trying to help God out. And so sometimes that's how it goes. It's like You might have a promise from God that you know is from Him, and it's not seeming to come to pass. It doesn't seem like it's going to pan out. So, hey, maybe I can help out a little bit. Well, that's control, right? Where you're manipulating circumstances to get the desired outcome of what you think needs to happen, and in some cases, even what you felt like God showed you was going to happen. So a lot of parents will control their children because they are trying to control the outcome. Like they're trying to control their children from making bad decisions. And so what happens a lot of times now, like if you ever read those books about different kinds of parenting, I think one of them is called the helicopter parent, and that parent is like hovering all the time. I would say that parent is probably a parent that has some control issues, because they're always trying to make sure that they can navigate everything for the child and not allow that child to make bad decisions, or if the child has made a bad decision, not allowing the child to experience the consequences of that bad decision. And that's not really ever going to be a good outcome. So as a parent, there is a big need to learn to trust God in the raising of your children, which means that you probably are going to have to, and I'm not talking about endangerment of life, I'm talking about allowing your child to suffer the consequences of decisions that they've made, or the lack of making a decision. So I've known of people that have done their kids' homework so their kids never, gets bad grades as far as not turning their homework in. I mean, these are really bad examples of issues, but they all stem from a parent who is trying to control the outcome of what happens in that kid's life. So I think it's actually important that we would have the courage to trust God, even in the midst of allowing our kids to make decisions that we know are not going to have the best outcome for them. And then allowing the kids not to rescue them, but even allowing our kids to have to deal with the consequences of that decision. And anyway, that's probably a whole topic in and of itself, but it is an example of some control issues that sometimes people deal with. Perfectionism is a form of control. Sometimes we can be a perfectionist over our lives, but a lot of times it's going to spill over and affect the people around us, right? Because I don't know, I mean, you could be a perfectionist just with your own life, but a lot of times if you have a perfection issue, it also means it probably isn't a thing of, I don't want other people to have a bad opinion about me. So whether that has to do with how I dress, how I keep my house, how my kids behave in public, or any failure of mine that I don't want anyone to see because that would diminish me in their eyes and therefore it would attack my own feeling of self-worth. So, I mean, that is perfectionism, right? Like, it is a control issue because in order to be a perfectionist, you have to control your environment and you have to control all the details. I think that would be exhausting. Again, we might all have a little tendency for some perfectionism, but we recognize there's some people that are really major perfectionists. Those people cannot handle failure, and they certainly cannot handle other people seeing that they can't do everything just so or just right. And that's probably a horrible place to live, but that is definitely a form of control. For a perfectionist, they are personally devastated if they cannot hold that standard of perfectionism, or if there's anything. So even if you're really a strict perfectionist, if you have a kid that messes up and it's public mess up, that could be devastating to you because you take that personally, like, it's my fault that my kid did that. And so these are just areas of trusting God rather than controlling our lives, trusting God. And there's probably 100 different applications of what I just talked about. So I can't give like a blanket, this is the answer. But the bottom line, foundational answer to whatever angle that perfectionism takes is learning to let go and trust God, and even trust God with the fact, like, you don't have to come across to everyone that you have it all under control and that your life is perfect. It's okay. In fact, people probably would really respect you if they could see that you're just human like everybody else. So Perfectionists can be super hard on themselves, and sometimes they can be hard on others, especially if they have a level of perfectionism that other people's behavior, maybe in their family, affects them, or the workplace, or whatever. Sometimes control issues will manifest in unhealthy communication patterns. So, I mean, we could go really deep into that, and maybe these would be good things to talk about sometime, like some of the common behavior patterns of people and how it's destructive to connection with people. We learned a lot, listening to Danny Silk and his Keep Your Love On stuff. And he's got all kinds of materials on communication. And his podcast, I believe he still has one. He's got all kinds of materials about this. But we learned a lot about communication through some of his material that was available to us. But one of the areas that I could say I have experienced personally with people, and maybe I've done it myself, I probably have, because sometimes the pattern that's set before you is what you learn, and you behave in that way. I don't think anyone does this on purpose or even thinks that they're doing this, but it's the effect of it is sometimes people can control, if they do this, they are controlling it. They will control meaningful communication or necessary communication through emotions that shut down communication. So I don't know if maybe you're this person, but maybe you've been in relationship with someone like this, but you get like where you touch something that hurts, like in the communication. And obviously, if we're going to have open communication, there's going to be some touchy points in that. And it might even sting a little bit. It might even hurt really bad, if someone is speaking truth to you about maybe how your words affect them, or certain patterns of behavior affect them. And if you touch something too deeply and that person's response is to go into some really crazy emotional responses, what that serves to do is just to shut down the communication. So what are they doing? They're controlling the ability to come to any resolution. You have to back off of that, and you can't talk about it. So it just closes off areas that never get talked about. I mean, they never, ever, you can't go there. You can't really resolve the situation. You can't really tell the person how you really feel, because they're going to respond in such a way that says, danger, danger, don't go there. I'm going to use my emotion to build this huge wall around me, and we're not going to connect over that particular issue because I can't handle it. So again, that is a control response that is in a negative way protecting that person, but it's actually protecting them from resolving something that would result then in a deeper connection with the person that they're talking to or avoiding talking to. Any level of control in any of these areas will definitely have a negative effect on us and on the people around us. So when God asks us to give up control and to trust Him with everything, that is the bonus or the opposite side of the coin, where our control issues have a negative effect. They have a negative effect on us. They will keep us from being free in certain areas, but they will also affect the people we love and the people around us, where if we trust God, it brings a freedom to our lives, and it brings a freedom into our relationships as well. So when God asks us to trust Him, it's not to make our lives difficult or scary. It's meant to bring freedom into our lives. And any area of control that we can relinquish and give to Him is going to bring greater freedom into our lives. And that's a good thing. So let's look first at one woman in the Bible that had some control issues. And this would be very similar to what I was talking about with Rebecca, with Jacob and Esau, and then trying to manipulate and strategize to make sure that what God said would come to pass. And in doing so, she was controlling the situation that definitely had some negative impacts. It had negative impacts on her son Jacob, and it had negative impacts on her son Esau. And it just had negative impacts for their entire family, how that worked out. So, but let's look at Sarah, and she was obviously married to Abram. She first was Sarai, and then God changed her name at the same time that he changed Abram's name to Abraham, changed her name from Sarai to Sarah. And I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but God had given Abram a promise that he was going to give them a child. He was going to give them a promised seed. And he was an old man at the time of the promise, and she was 10 years younger than him. So he was 75 when he got this promise, and she was 65. And you all know the story. They did not have this son until he was 100 and she was 90. So very supernatural. There's a lot in the Bible that talks about that. But here's the promise. And over again, they believed God, they accepted the promise, but when they didn't see the manifestation, they did what many of us do, and that is, okay, maybe there's something I'm supposed to do, like maybe this will work out this way, so I need to step in and try to make this happen. So this is the result. The result of this is a negative, right? But I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 6. I should have mentioned that to you in case you want to get your Bible out. So I'll just wait a second. If you want to pull that up on your phone or you just want to listen, is fine. But since I'm reading a few verses, you might want to read along with me. So Genesis chapter 16. And I'm sure you will be familiar with this story. Okay. So in Genesis 16, verse 1, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. All right, bad idea. We can see that right from the beginning. And you have a victim here. You have Hagar, who is a victim. She is under their control, and so she has nothing to say about this particular arrangement. So she's a victim. Abraham obviously gave in to his wife. Should have said, bad idea. Let's trust God. And we're going to see the results of this decision. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So this would have been when he's 85 and Sarai is 75. So 10 years into this time, this is when Hagar was taken as a wife for him. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. So her response wasn't very good, right? She thought, oh, I've got the promised child here. Now Sarai is thinking, well, she's going to have this child, but it's going to be my child. And this is not the angle that Hagar was coming at. She was treating Sarai with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, this is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. This is a messy situation, right? Definitely causing trouble in their marriage. It's definitely causing trouble in the relationship of Hagar with them both, but mostly with Sarai. And Abram replied, look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarai treated Hagar as harshly that she finally ran away. And so what did she do? She was using, what was Sarai doing in this whole scenario? She was using her power and the authority that she had to guide and manage the promise of God. So she was trying to control the outcome. She was trying to use her ability to manage it to bring the promise of God to pass in her way. She was making it happen, and she thought that she was able to make it happen through her own effort and her own strategy. So have you ever tried to help God? I know you have, because I have. Like, there are promises God has given us, and when it doesn't come to pass, many times we step and try to figure out how to make it happen. And this is what she was doing. So we can relate to it, because it may not seem like such a big deal as what she did, as giving her husband into another woman's arms, but it's still the same principle of I'm going to try to control the outcome of the situation. and make the promise of God come to pass. So the result of making something happen in your own strength is that it will be an outcome that will have much less blessing than what God intended. And when Hagar had a son, we know that he was named Ishmael. And he is forever, and he's a victim of the situation too, right? He has nothing to do with it. He is an innocent offspring of a really bad decision. But his name is Ishmael, and over again, when people want to refer, Christians, when we want to refer to a fleshly outcome, we will say that was, we will refer to Ishmael, that was a fleshly outcome, which is not fair to Ishmael, but that he was a fleshly outcome. Now he's a child. He is loved by God, and God blessed him in other ways. But he certainly wasn't the promised son, and it created a great deal of contention in the marriage and other outcomes that were not good. So in Galatians 4:22 and 23, it says, "The scriptures say that Abraham had two sons, one from his slave wife and one from his freeborn wife. The son of the slave wife was born in a human attempt to bring about the fulfillment of God's promise." That's exactly what we've been talking about. That was Sarai's and Abram's human attempt to bring about the fulfillment of God's promise. But the son of the freeborn wife was born as God's own fulfillment of his promise. God had said to Abram, "I am going to give you a child." And he kept saying over and over, "No, I'm going to give this child to you through your wife Sarai. She's barren. You've been unable to have children with her. But the promise of God was that you would have a child with her." But the other child was born out of the human attempt to bring a fulfillment of God's promise. And the fruit of that human thing was a great deal of difficulty in their family and even in the life for Hagar and for Ishmael, because eventually they got sent away. And God had promised Abram at the time, he goes, I'll make a great nation of Ishmael. Don't feel bad about this. But nevertheless, it was a heartbreak, I'm sure, and it was, because we can read about that. In fact, I might teach on that at some point, because there's a teaching I did years ago, and I think I called it The Sweetness of the Lord, and it was all about how sweet that God was to Hagar. Now, we could read, and we just, kind of think of her as a throwaway character. It's like, she wasn't a throwaway character. I mean, they call her a slave of theirs, so she had no freedom of her own life. And yet, God loved her, and he cared for her. And, she's not a throwaway character. She was a victim in the situation and had to bear with the consequences of the bad choices of Sarai and Abram. But God loved her, and she was precious to him, and so was Ishmael. So there is a fruit of the flesh, and there is the fruit of the promise. And the fruit of the promise that comes from God is always going to bring the blessing of the Lord. In fact, we'll end with this verse, Proverbs 10:22. It says, "The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it." So we'll end with that, and just recognize, when we trust God, that the end result of that is the fruit is the fulfillment of God's promises, and we didn't manipulate it, we didn't control it, we didn't bring a fleshly fruit into it. We brought the blessing of the Lord. Well, we didn't bring it. God brought it, but we allowed it through our decision to trust him completely with all of our heart and not to lean onto our own understanding. So let's just close in prayer, and I'll continue this next week. Thank you, Lord, for this day. And Father, I just thank you for every listener of Joy Comes in the Morning. God, I thank you that you are just ministering your love to them right now, that no matter what they're going through, no matter what stressors might be in their life, no matter what problems they might be facing, that you are even assuring them right now that you have an answer to that. And if they will just relinquish any control and give it to you and trust you, that their response would be, God, I choose to trust you, and I know that you're good, and I know that you're going to show up for me because you said you would never leave me or forsake me. So God, I pray right now that there would be such an overflow of that assurance in everyone's life right now. God, we thank you that you're with us. We thank you that you love us. We thank you that you desire to bless our lives in every aspect of our lives, every nook and cranny, every relationship within our families, within our church, within our friendships, that God, you desire to bless our lives. So God, we thank you for this. Thank you for working in our lives, and thank you for showing us the things we need to see. And I just pray all these things in Jesus' name. And everyone said,